Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, Quick Match gameplay. This time around I'm playing as the Dwarves against the filthy Skaven, led by only Fardo is real, on the map, the Ashenhall. And this time around we are running a bit of a unique Dwarven build, definitely hoping to catch my opponent by surprise with a Vanguard composition. And it's something that Dwarves are actually, in my opinion, one of the better equipped factions to do, with the exception of Beastmen and Wood Elves. In my opinion, Dwarves are definitely in the running for the best Vanguard capable composition. Now, as you can see, there's already some fire going out, but it's nothing too significant. I'm going to shoot up some Skaven slaves there. For this composition, of course, you do have to. There's no Vanguard capable lords for the Dwarves. The only Vanguard capable lord in the game is actually Karaz on foot. So if you try Vanguard builds, make sure to have a lord who can either get to the fight quickly or something that, or is fairly cheap and isn't taking up too much of your army's points. So in this case, I did decide to bring a Rune Lord. The main reason I did bring a Rune Lord is just because he's tanky and he has runes. It's kind of obvious. He has a lot of armor at 120, which against most Skaven missile units is actually pretty good, and it'll hold up well against most Skaven as well. He does have decent melee defense, decent melee attack. I didn't put him on his Anvil of Doom, and the reason for that is actually because Skaven have been tending to do some mass builds where they mass a lot of large units, or rat ogres or that sort of stuff. Dwarves don't really have the best crowd control, especially when I don't bring Thanes, and so I wanted to have a lord that can get knocked about and that way stay alive. Otherwise, Rune Lord is nothing too fancy, but he does have Master Rune of Oath and Steel, Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, and Master Rune of Negation, all of which are really powerful. I did bring as well the only other non-Vanguard unit I brought for support was the cannon, which I actually veteraned up all the way with nine chevrons. And you might be thinking that's a bit overkill, but I did want to have. I figured that with all the frontline pressure I'd be applying, I would be capable of utilizing the cannon to kind of snipe down high-value targets from far away without having to actually put it at risk or having to worry about defending it too much. For my main army, of course, it is actually anchored by the Nordgrumlings Ironbreakers, who are the Vanguard-capable Ironbreakers with 15 extra models. They have monstrous melee defense at 82, 40 melee attack, very high HP, of course, because there's a lot of them. Immunity, psychology, these guys are just amazing all over. They have satchel charges, which is really good against the filthy rats who tend to mob up. Interestingly enough, they do actually have a lower melee defense than maxed and higher melee attack than 9 Veterancy Ironbreakers. So that's just an interesting little tidbit that I realized when I was testing it, when I was checking stuff out in the custom game screen. Now for my front line, or for the rest of my front line, it's all about miners with blasting charges. The miners with blasting charges are veteraned up to a certain degree. Some of them up to 3, some of them up to 4, depending on how much money I had for them. And these guys, of course, once again, they're mostly there just to soak up damage and attack with satchel charges. They're not really there to dish out that much on their own. But given their high armor and their armor-piercing weapon strength and all that, against most Skaven units, they'll actually be capable of trading fairly efficiently, given how bad most Skaven units are. Then I do have 2 normal miners out on one on this far flank over here and one here in the front, just meant to zone my opponent away while I nuke him down with satchel charges. Then the main kind of damaging contingent here is a mass of Rangers, and we do have 6 normal Rangers. I didn't bring Bugman's Rangers. I don't really think they're worthwhile given how expensive they are. And then 3 units of Rangers with great weapons, one of which is the Ulthar's Raiders, of course, for that debuff with Mark of Ulthar. These guys are really there to kind of shut down my opponent's large units. Most of the Skaven large units have very poor armor. The great weapons are actually there for exclusively one, or I guess 2 reasons, and that's to kill Lords and Doom Wheels. Without great weapons, killing a Doom Wheel with Rangers with crossbows, or a Lord on, say, a Plague Furnace is going to be incredibly difficult. So I wanted to not have to deal with that. For my opponent, he did bring a bit of an interesting composition. He did bring. I'm trying to look for his Lord here. There we go. There's Lord Skrulk with Liber Bubonicus, and I do believe he actually did bring the Rod of Corruption, which of course is a pretty powerful AoE damage damage spell around him. His front line is very cheap, made mostly of Skaven slaves, some Skaven slave spears, which I assume was just there to flesh things out because obviously you don't really care for anti-large against dwarves, and they're there to kind of tank for a more damaging proportion of the army, which includes an assassin, multiple pair of plague monks there, actually a trio of plague monks. Some rat ogres. You can see one unit of rat ogres over there. My opponent's army was a little spread out because I think he was expecting to engage over on this end. A doom wheel hidden here in the back. And some Deathglow Bombardiers, which is actually, these guys are pretty powerful, but they do cause magic damage, so dwarves are a little resistant to that. And then Plague Monk Sensor Bearers, once again, magic damage. So despite having armor piercing, they won't do the best against dwarves just because they're going to get, their damage will be reduced by 25%. That's definitely, I think, one of the problems for Skaven, is that a lot of their armor piercing is magical, and it can be a bit of a problem. You can see the Skaven slaves here have baited out the satchel charges, because I did leave them on auto fire, but I'm not too concerned about that. If you satchel charges down just to knock these guys out and get them off my back is, I think, a worthwhile sacrifice. You can see over here the Doom Wheel is trying to be sneaky, but I have sighted it a little while ago, and I'm turning the cannon to kind of face it and open fire on it. And because I'm still fairly close to the cannon, if my opponent does just decide to push through, he's probably going to get caught up as you can see, the poor Doom Wheel is already taking some fire, and it's actually just going to back out. Now, the opponent is kind of trying to flank around, and I think he's trying to get a more favorable engagement, avoiding these woods, which is actually a little interesting. The woods would provide him with some defense against my shooting. You can see I'm shifting the rangers. Now, rangers are not amazing in melee. They're the worst of the dwarf infantry or shooting infantry as far as close quarters is concerned, the normal rangers. But of course, against Skaven slaves, if these guys do come into grips, rangers will still trash them. Over here you can see I have kind of, my formation has kind of fallen apart and it's become a bit haphazard. I haven't really been rotating the formation around because it really isn't possible here to keep the same formation as you're shifting around. Over here you can see that my cannon is trying to engage on these rat ogres, but it's really just not going to work out. Yes, I can take off maybe a model or two if I get lucky, but in the end these guys are just going to get on top of the cannon and completely stomp it. However, I'm capable of focusing over here on the assassin and scroll, just trying to do a little bit of damage to him. And now you can see my opponent is just kind of pushing in. You can see these rat ogres are going to get caught up on these miners, even though they will, of course, bust through them pretty effectively. And so I'm pushing my Rune Lord in. I'm going to have to rotate my Norgling's Ironbreakers pretty soon. You can see my crossbow fire is now kind of turning around and focusing over here. Now, my opponent does get his Doom Wheel through, but he does make a bit of a mistake here and doesn't go right for my Great Weapon Rangers. As you'll see, I'm going to hit it with a marked by Ulthar, and these guys are going to go down, and this poor Doom Wheel is going to go down very, very quickly. In spite of its armor, it's been dropped down to 70, and of course, range with great weapons have absolutely monstrous range with great weapons have absolutely monstrous range DPS. And this poor Doom Wheel is going to go down like a 9-pin. It's already shattered in 2 volleys. Rat ogres over here are getting focused down a little bit by the crossbows. In the meantime, my opponent's rat ogres over here have been pressured off by crossbow fire, and I'll be able to shift fire on the plague monks. One of the good things is that rat ogres don't have regen, unlike a lot of the other monstrous units, and so I don't need to be too concerned about them kind of when they come back and becoming healthy or anything like that. You can see I'm kind of trying to focus down these plague monks, but then realizing these Deathglow Bombardiers are trying to nuke down my backline, especially the Norgling's Ironbreakers. I'm going to start shooting at them with the crossbows. Crossbows don't have the best of armor piercing, and these guys do have 100 armor. I think the crossbows have like 4 armor piercing, I want to say. Yeah, it's 4. It's actually a little better than the Empire crossbows, but I am trying to just focus these guys down. You can see they've pushed forward quite a bit. Lear Bubonic is hitting my Rune Lord. Despite the fact that the dwarves do have built-in magic resistance, this guy's going to take quite a bit of hurt, especially because he's not on the Anvil of Doom, which provides 40% magic resist. Over here, some Skaven slaves are being a nuisance, as are some rat ogres, but at this close range, I'm going to be able to just focus these rat ogres down with a good old-fashioned great weapon fire. And the rat ogres they're good in melee, but at the same time they don't have very much armor. Their melee defense is somewhat poor, so they can be kind of focused down even by ranged infantry. Over here, satchel charges are going down and disrupting my opponent's formation, there's still a decent amount of satchel charges on my troops. You can see Norgling's I'm not even able to pronounce it there. The Norgling's Ironbreakers are hitting these guys really hard, and most of these plague monks are just routing off. Over here, the plague monks are slugging out with the miners, and as you can see, the miners are actually tanking things out really effectively, despite the fact that their stats are pretty terrible in comparison to the plague monks. These guys are capable of just kind of absorbing the attack, and now the Norgling's Ironbreakers are coming in and causing some major hurt. Skrulk is tied down, but at this point my opponent is kind of realizing that most of his army has been routed off. You can see the rat ogres over here are finally retreating, and he does decide to bow at this point. So, as far as the actual kill count goes, as you can see, we did have a huge army, of course, with a whole bunch of miners and some rangers. This is about as wide of an army as you're ever going to get with dwarves. The only way you can really go wider is if you went all melee with dwarf warriors or something. But this is about as many troops as you're ever going to get with dwarves. And as you can see, the troops, of course, fighting against fairly cheap infantry, these guys performed fairly well. The miners racked in, some of them racked up over 40 kills. Definitely performed okay, all things considered, given that they're a fairly cheap infantry unit. And the satchel charges, of course, were helping a decent amount, just disrupting in time and blocking my opponent from pushing through and that sort of stuff. Growling's Ironbreakers did some monsters work, and it looks like they didn't even lose a model, actually. Most of the heavy lifting was, of course, done by the Rangers, who managed to annihilate that Doom Wheel and then tear through my opponent's Plague Monks and Surveyors really effectively. I think one of the big problems for I think the Skaven versus Dwarf matchup, the Dwarves are actually in a decent spot there. Even with with the normal build, especially because you can bring Thanes and kind of root your opponent in place. But their infantry definitely cannot trade with Dwarven infantry, not in a cost-efficient manner. And it was just taking very long for my opponent's Plague Monks. They got clumped up, and they were struggling to kind of hack through the miners. And in the end, they were just getting gunned down by Rangers. I do believe as well in this, one of the things that there have been a lot of changes in Mortal Empires, and one of the things I've noticed is that range units now tend to arc over your own troops a lot better than they did before, if they have an arc. I've been seeing archers based on almost point blank shooting over my own troops and kind of arcing down on the enemy, and it makes them much more potent, especially against sort of lightly armored composition like this one for the Skaven. Regardless, as you can see, some of the Plague Monks definitely did well. Of course, the miners are no match for Plague Monks. It's just that they're not as terrible as some of the other squishy infantry against them. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm doing an awkward, unusual dwarf build, but it's always good. Always feels good running over 1,000 dwarves and just kind of mobbing your enemy with ranged fire. Good game to my opponent. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about Total War Warhammer or anything like that, be sure to post them down in the comments and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.